Yes, I think that if I perceive the universe as a kind of seven-dimensional nested space, and part of the purpose of life is to move up from that first dimensional space up through the second, third, fourth, fifth, and so on. And it's a natural movement of energy. So one could say that a rock makes that movement from a rock to a supreme being over many millennia, through a great variety and diversity of experience and movement of energy and so on and so forth. And that's a natural ascendant path that we all take. And you could say that if you want to think of it in terms of space, we can call them dimensions. If you want to think of it in terms of consciousness, we could call it a density. So you have low density and high density. And so for me, a tree definitely has consciousness, but it's quite a low vibration in a sense. It doesn't mean bad, but it's quite a low vibration. And if you also consider then that we exist in that third dimensional space, or that third density of consciousness, the 3D world, then we have this thing that we call normality, which I call the sliver of normality, which is a thing that is offered to us from the moment we show up, really, as a baby. And that sliver of normality is basically pumped through the television, through the cities, through our parents, through the education system, through the military-industrial complex, through the corporations, entertainment, business, everywhere. And it constitutes, for most people, the whole world. So you collapse down this seven-dimensional model, you collapse down the third-dimensional aspect of that, and you focus on a tiny, tiny sliver within that. And the con is, basically, the control con is very simple, which is that that tiny sliver is put forth as the whole universe. And it simply isn't true. And when people delve into that, you realize that there is a manipulation and a fabrication of that. There has to be, because it has to be held together. And there are certain think tanks and groups and foundations and societies, some public, some private, some secret, some completely opaque and not visible at all, and those things shape that normality. And you can get very conspiratorial about this, but I prefer to think of it on a more metaphysical level, which is that initially it's a way of keeping things in order, and at times that works okay. So if you grew up in 1950s America or 1950s Britain, it seemed to be quite a pleasant place, and you could leave your front door open and everything was nice, and the food was reasonable, and people had a level of prosperity that perhaps, was quite harmonious. But in actual fact, it was a very, very blatant reflection of that sliver of normality, and there was no knowledge of anything outside the sort of Western, white, Christian paradigm. And now that's changed. That sliver of normality gets very aggressive in protecting itself, and it does so with more overt kind of totalitarian and fascist impulses, because it's trying to protect itself. And because of the proliferation of information and the freedom of accessing that, we can educate ourselves to quite a high degree in a very short amount of time. Now, there's so much stuff splattered all over the internet that you do have to really hone your own skills of discernment and discipline, and have a scholarly attitude to that. Because if you don't, you sort of tend to tie your own shoelaces together, really. And before long, you realize that you're not going very far. So you do have to exercise these disciplines that a lot of academic professionals, shall we say, have been trained to do. We have to train ourselves to do that. But when we do it, the advantage that the independent scholar or researcher or philosopher has is they have complete freedom, and they don't owe anything to anybody. There are no allegiances, no alliances. And so you can really go where the conscious flow takes you. And it's not just information. I put a very distinct emphasis in my work on experiential encounter, on practice, on the practical. So it's no use doing this just on the screen or just on the page. You have to actually take it out there in the real world.
And that's a great segue into what we're going to get into in the second segment, which is, again, how you can participate and really how you have to participate in this transformation. And the great news is that, you don't have to go out and do something that's going to be seen by millions of people. Just your personal transformation and participation in action, as Neil says, is crucial to the overall tipping point, 100 monkey theory, however you would want to describe that. More on that with Neil Kramer after the break.
For meditation, the first thing is the posture. You may sit in any posture. The posture must be very comfortable and stable. We can meditate either on a floor or on a chair. We can meditate in any place, wherever we feel comfortable. Sit comfortably, cross your legs, clasp your fingers. Now, close your eyes. Stop inner or outer chatter. Don't chant any mantra. Just relax. Totally relax. Just relax. When we cross our legs and clasp our fingers, energy circuit is formed and gives more stability. Eyes are doors of the mind, so eyes should be closed. Mantra chanting or any chattering, inner or outer, are the activities of the mind, so it should be stopped. When body relaxes, consciousness travels to the next zone, mind and intellect. Mind is nothing but a bundle of thoughts. There are numerous thoughts always coming to the surface of the mind. Whenever there are thoughts in the mind, we may get many questions, known or unknown. To transcend the mind and intellect, one has to observe the breath. Observation is the nature of the self. So, one should just witness the breath. Don't do conscious breathing. Don't inhale or exhale consciously. Let inhalation or exhalation happen on its own. Just observe the normal breathing. This is the main key. This is the way.
Welcome back to the One Network. Our guest today, Neil Kramer, writer, speaker, philosopher, and somebody that's actually, I think you have a workshop coming up in September, from September 30th to October 2nd in Oregon. Is that right, Neil?
Yes, that's right. I do quite a few workshops now in the States, being based here now. So yeah, there's a workshop up in Oregon at the end of September for 2 days, experiential workshop, and you can find out more about that at neilkramer.com.
And that is where the rubber hits the road, as Neil was referring to, in the previous segment. This is a very, at least I'll speak from my personal evolution journey, whatever you want to call it, which goes through different emotional areas: anger, disappointment, hopelessness, optimism, etc. But it also goes through different phases of passive to active learning, which is, again, as Neil was stating, once you're inundated with all this knowledge and you start to open up and you start to connect with the truth in certain areas, it can be a very overwhelming and even addictive experience, because there's so much out there that we don't know, that once you start to really get deep into that sort of quagmire, you can become guilty of only evolving through knowledge, which again, as Neil was saying, if you don't start to apply that knowledge, whether it be through meditating, whether it be through shamanism and psychedelics, actual experience through metaphysics, going to workshops, changing how you eat, turning off the television, these types of things are the necessary action to put that sort of theory to work, and the workshops that Neil do are a perfect example of that. I don't know how much of a movie buff you are, Neil, but a movie that sort of stayed with me is The Bronx Tale with Robert De Niro. It was about 10, 15 years ago. I don't know if you remember it.
Yeah, I know. He directed it, didn't he?
That's right, and it was his directorial debut. And it's a good New York sort of old mafia movie. But one of the things that stuck out for me as the sort of tagline that he spoke to his son C was the greatest tragedy in life, he would tell his son, is a waste of potential. And it really struck me personally, and I think about this collectively. When you refer to that sliver of normality that we've been, again, we've just been shown, the curtain's been pulled back a little bit, and we get to see this real small, limited version of what we really are, and we believe that's the extent of what we are. And the real sadness there, Neil, and it really can get pretty emotional for me when I think about how we individually and collectively have been robbed of our true potential as incredibly unlimited beings, and really over the last few thousand years. Do you see that as a tragedy, I guess, or was it a necessary step in evolving to where we're at now?
On a personal level, it's very difficult and challenging. On a non-personal level, or a transpersonal level, shall we say, I think it is a necessary step in a process that I sometimes refer to as mapping polarity. So to understand the structure of reality and to understand how consciousness unfolds and deepens and purifies, we have to accept that there are light and shadow aspects of that. And certainly, as the Hindu spiritual philosophers suggested some time ago, there are light phases and dark phases, and we have certainly also, indisputably been through a dark phase. And I think we're just coming out of it now. So the Hindus, as many people will be familiar, refer to these yuga cycles, and a dark period of being the Kali Yuga cycle. Mm-hmm. But what we're talking about is, on a metaphysical level, in contemporary language, is a process where we explore the relationship between consciousness and cause and effect. And we're exploring that through the lens of what you might call darkness or destruction or fragmentation. And it teaches us really what the effects of our thoughts and feelings and the effect of our spirit, what effect do those things have on the world. And if you ignore that on a consistent basis over and over and over, then eventually the outside world takes on a very concrete aspect of that. Mm-hmm. So you cannot simply plod on and ignore your own spiritual unfoldment, because eventually the outer world will begin to directly and very literally as well represent one's inner state. So you could say that, yes, it's challenging that the outer world, being such a mess, is a representation of the kind of sloppy spiritual state that most people are in. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you want to put an optimistic slant on it, you can say, okay, we're now mapping optimal negative polarity, and it's all up from here. It's all, it's all happy days from here onwards, really. But that process is a curve on a graph. It's not a light switch, it's a curve.